So if you've got any questions or you want further information about anything we cover today, feel free to get in contact with us. Obviously, we'll share Andrew and Rachel's information as contact information as well if you do wish to follow up with the other two presenters this morning also. So in terms of the agenda, four areas to cover off. I'm going to give a quick insight to the automotive sector, the size, scale, challenges, opportunities. Then we're going to introduce Rachel Chambers, Chief Operating Officer for DER Centre North East. He's going to take us through the opportunities around driving the electric revolution. Then we're going to hear from Andrew, looking at automotive standards and entry requirements to be able to work in the sector. And then I'm just going to quickly finish off with the sports available through the NEAA and also our Supply Chain Northeast programme, which is really the driver for this event today. So on to the agenda. The sector as a whole generates around 82 billion of sales. That was the figure in 2018. They're the figures that are currently available through SMMT. Thank you, John. In terms of manufactured product, 1.5 million vehicles in 2018, falling to 1.3 million in 2019, largely due to uncertainty around diesel and electrification. As a country, we're still ranked 5th in Europe and 13th globally. In terms of commercial vehicles, 85,000 commercial vehicles produced in 2018. We're ranked 5th in Europe and 21st globally. And off-highway vehicles, which we do include within automotive as the NEAA, about 60,000 off-highway vehicles were produced. We are ranked #1 in Europe and 5th globally, so a very strong sector for the UK. And obviously in the North East, we do have a strong off-highway sector also. And the UK produced about 2.7 million engines in 2018 also. So we employ as a sector about 823,000 across UK automotive. And in terms of just the manufacturing side, that's approximately 390,000. We move on to the North East. We are a globally significant automotive region. The image and the company logos show a number of the key automotive companies and OEMs and tier ones, and a select number of growing SMEs. Within the region, we've got 5 OEMs, 31 tier ones, and about 200 companies operating within the supply chain. 14 R&D centres, 2 engine manufacturers. But if we start looking at the new and emerging technology around the electrification, we are a very strong region also. We've got 7 electric motor manufacturers, 2 battery manufacturers, and 12 companies involved in power electronics. Combined as a region, we generate around 11 billion of sales, employ about 30,000 across the North East, and we're producing currently just over 1 million electric motors a year. So when you consider the transition towards electrification, we are a very, very strong region in this area, and we're still the region with the largest battery manufacturer in Europe, with the Envision facility, the ex-Nissan facility at Washington. However, as a sector, we're obviously facing a number of challenges, and even before COVID came along, we had Brexit, and Brexit still remains an unknown threat to our competitiveness. A no-deal scenario remains a threat, and we could see it leading to increased localisation of opportunities for UK manufacturers. I think that's certainly the way it's going. But we must remember that across the EU, 17 million cars were manufactured. And obviously a lot of our larger suppliers do export to the European market and further afield as well. When we then add in the impact of COVID and the increased threat of global pandemics, then it really does reiterate the issues around global supply chains. They're fantastic when everything's fine and working, but once you get incidents like pandemics or the Japanese tsunami, then we really do see significant disruption to supply chains, which make it very difficult for OEMs to source and produce vehicles. So as a result, I really do think we will see significant changes to the way we do business. I do think there's more opportunities going to come up for localization of supply chains. But then in addition to that, obviously, as a sector, we're also facing a significant move away. And we're expected to see more change in the next 8 to 10 years than we have in its entire history to date. That's not only in terms of the vehicle we produce, but also how we manufacture the vehicles. So if you consider the top left-hand picture there, the first cars that were produced against a Tesla of today, and you think of the complete change there, but over the next 8 to 10 years, we'll see more change. It's quite a significant move for the sector. Obviously, the automotive sector is a very important sector for the UK economy, and we see an awful lot of support that comes out of the UK government. On the previous slides there, you would have noticed all the different organisations that are geared up towards supporting the sector. But if we look, we've obviously got the Automotive Council, who set out the strategy for the UK automotive sector and been very instrumental in getting the sector back to where we were a couple of years ago. In terms of the government, they've set out the industrial strategy, and the automotive sector was the first sector to receive a sector deal. The first of many, we believe. We're expecting others to come out related to supporting the sector. And linked to that, we've seen a lot of funding coming in around the new technology areas for the automotive sector. So go back to the battery Faraday, it was about 246 million to support the development of a battery industrialisation centre and also develop the battery supply chain in the UK. 3 key centres there: the Faraday Institution, Research and Innovation Project, and then the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre. We also have Zenzik, who are previously known as Meridian. They're tasked to support and fund the CAV logistics, the CAV activities across the UK and develop the UK test bed. Driving the Electric Revolution, the latest one, but I'm not going to steal Rachel's thunder, and Rachel will be taking us through Driving the Electric Revolution in a short while. And then one of the other big areas is obviously industrial digitalisation. And the Made Smarter review is a key document, and the funding that's coming out alongside Made Smarter will truly impact the automotive sector. One other organisation that's worth mentioning is the Advanced Propulsion Centre, and particularly the work they're doing around the technology roadmaps. If nobody's seen the technology roadmaps, I'd certainly recommend downloading that report, because it gives a guide up to around 2040 around automotive propulsion technologies, and as and when the new technologies are expected to come into market. Does really give you a great insight into where the sector's going. But coming back, if we think that yes, the vehicles are changing, but still 70% of the components of the vehicle from today are expected to remain the same. And I do envisage that we'll see OEMs looking to source more local content. As I mentioned, that's really been amplified by Brexit, by the impact of COVID-19, Japanese tsunami, etc. But undoubtedly, the new technology will also present market opportunities for existing companies operating in the sector to look at how they can expand their capabilities, but also for new entrants who are going to move into the automotive industry. So now I'm just going to take you through some of the key opportunities within the sector. This slide was produced about 3-4 years ago now. It is being updated by DIT, but we do envisage the figures to be fairly similar, so there might be a little bit of change around, but it's still a huge localisation opportunity for the UK automotive sector. So at tier 1 and tier 2 level, it's about 6 billion of product OEMs would prefer to source in the UK if they had the opportunity. The reason they can't currently is either it's a number of factors. It's either the capacity within the UK. We don't have existing manufacturers in certain areas, for instance, alloy wheels. So there's a 210 million opportunity for an alloy wheel manufacturer here in the UK, or the UK supply chain just isn't competitive enough. So we need to work with the existing suppliers to make them more competitive, so OEMs can look to source more product within the UK. Then if we start looking at battery technologies and the opportunity there, the estimate there's about 4.8 billion a year opportunity for the UK chemical industry. So as part of Supply Chain North East, we are working closely with NEPIC, the North East Process Industry Cluster. We do have a very strong chemical sector here in the North East, so we do believe there's more opportunity for battery related manufacturer here in the UK and here in the North East. I know DIT, for instance, are working to try and secure investment from key organisations for key materials in terms of the battery production. In terms of connected autonomous mobility or connected autonomous vehicles, obviously Zenzik, as I mentioned previously, are leading that area. They fund the core test beds for the UK, really trying to make sure the UK is a market leader in connected and self-driving technologies. They recently submitted a 2.3 billion bid into the government for which will support the development of CAM up to 2030, and really just set out an ambitious plan to try and establish the UK as that market leader. And it's worth noting that we have been working closely with Zenzik over the past 2 years to look at how the North East could support the national connected autonomous mobility agenda. And we have been working with them around the connected autonomous vehicle logistics hub here in the North East, but I will come on to that in a short while. Then one area that gets overlooked quite a bit in discussions around automotive is the infotainment area. Now, I do believe as a region that we have a very strong gaming sector and IT sector, and there's obviously a huge opportunity in terms of infotainment as we move towards self-driving vehicles. Some of the figures you look there, will market expect to be in the region of 34 billion by 2022, significant compound annual growth rates. So how we try and capitalize on that, given our regional strengths, I think is something we really do need to start looking at as a region, and looking at how we can support organisations to access this growing market. Then if we start thinking about industrial digitalisation and Made Smarter in particular, there are two key programs that the government have been funding around Made Smarter. The first was a pilot in the Northwest aimed at engaging SMEs, and really about trying to support SMEs to adopt digital technologies. They are looking at rolling that adoption program out, and I know the North East is one of the North East and Tees Valley is one of the regions who are being earmarked for phase 2. That has stalled a little bit at the moment, but we do envisage that pilot will be rolled out and will support SMEs going forward. So we believe the North East is well placed to capitalise on that adoption program as and when it comes through. And key programs like Supply Chain North East will be a great conduit to link SMEs with that program. One of the other key areas is the Manufacturing Made Smarter programme, which received about 147 million from the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And really that's looking to try and deliver a 30% increase in manufacturing productivity by 2030 through the use of digital technologies. And it's really themed around 4 key areas. So smart, connected factories, connected supply chain, adaptable, flexible manufacturing and skills, and then design, make, test. They've already funded the first round of projects. There's about circa 30 million of projects currently going on within the Manufacturing Made Smarter space. And it really is aimed at the early adopters of industrial digitalisation technologies. So it tends to be sort of the larger end of companies that the programme is supporting, but I do know they are also engaging with SMEs within those programmes as well. We are expecting the next phase of funding to come out shortly. I think it was due early part of this year, but with the COVID pandemic, it has delayed things there at the moment. Coming on to some of the key opportunities across the North East, as I mentioned earlier, we've been working with Zenzik around how we might establish a connected autonomous vehicle logistics test bed and a centre of excellence for the UK. We've just secured some funding to complete a feasibility study, which we will start on that activity next week. That will really set out the opportunity for the North East and get down into the detail about how we can establish this centre, what it will deliver, and the benefit to industry. But the reason the North East has been identified as a key region for this activity is quite simple. We've got the largest car plant here in the UK with Nissan. We've got a tight geographic proximity of suppliers who offer a range of products and a variety of product from low risk, low volume product being delivered into NMUK through to high risk, high volume products that we can test CAV logistics in a realistic environment. We've got a significant testing infrastructure. We've got the Nissan test track, but also private roads that link various parts of the plant. So if you take Vantec in the bottom right of that picture, just below the test track, they've got a private road and they deliver about 100 deliveries a day into Nissan when it's operating in normal conditions. And then also we've got great synergies against CESAM and also driving the electric revolution. We have strengths within the university, particularly with Newcastle University around connected autonomous mobility. And we've got various catapult activity in the region that also supports it. And as I mentioned, we've also got that strong tech sector, which will be important in a CAV logistics testbed as well. And more recently, we've been working with Sunderland Council to look at how we could secure funding for 5G within the region. And we are submitting a bid to DCMS for a 5G pilot for CAV logistics, which will be on the Vantec to Nissan, well, it's planned to be on the Vantec to Nissan route. Then coming on to CESAM, hopefully, if people have been in the region and driving around, they will have seen the CESAM building. That was a £19 million investment by Sunderland City Council. Fantastic confidence in the centre. It will be home to DER, North East Centre, when it's not being used as a Nightingale hospital to support the current pandemic. So many of you may have seen in the news that there is a centre in the North East, and it is the CESAM building on IAM that's being used. It's an ideal location given the fact it's 96,000 square foot of shop floor space, a workshop area which is being converted, and then about 24,000 of square foot of office space on there as well. So it's a huge building that will support manufacturing innovation here in the North East. We do have a bid with a number of key partners, a bid being led by University of Sunderland for 34 million to support CESAM and the development of CESAM in terms of kitting it out and with its capability. That's a strength in places bid, and we are expecting to hear the results of that funding bid fairly soon. They should have been out now, but again, government have been focusing on other areas. Linked to CESAM, we do expect it to be a key digital demonstration centre, looking at the digital technologies, and it will link in with a CAV logistics test bed as well, particularly looking at the interface between robotics and automated systems. So how you can load and unload articulated trucks, wagons, etc., with robots and automated systems. And then we've got also got IAM. Obviously, it's a huge infrastructure project. It was highlighted by the government as a key national infrastructure project. It will be developed over 2 phases. It's about 370 acre sites just north of Nissan. Very significant opportunity. It is home to CESAM. It will be home to DER. It will be home to CAV Logistics. And I'm sure it'll be home to many other organisations as and when they move on to site. There are a number of buildings already gone up, and the bottom corner we've got a huge building for SNOP. You've also got Faltech on site as well, and CESAM. But I know the councils are talking to a number of other businesses about setting up on the IAM facility as well. So over the coming years, we should see more and more companies moving on to that site. And I've no doubt there will be strong attraction for automotive related companies, particularly supply chain into NEAA, but also those that are linked into manufacturing innovation through CESAM, those that are linked into driving the electric revolution, and those that are linked into CAV logistics. For me, we've got a great opportunity to look at transforming the North East automotive sector away from one that's famed for automotive assembly. As I say, the largest car plant in the UK is based here with NEAA. But if we can develop this innovation side, we really do have an opportunity to transform the region into a true automotive powerhouse. And I think it's really exciting times. Despite some of the challenges we're currently facing, I do believe it's really exciting times for the North East automotive sector as these new initiatives come through. So on that, I'm going to now hand over to Rachel Chambers, who will take us through driving the electric revolution. What I would say is if people do have any questions at all, there is a capability to be able to post the questions online. I would suggest if you post those questions, we'll then take questions at the end of the presentations. If we don't get a chance to to cover off all the questions, we will answer them and follow up with everyone after the event. So now I'm going to hand over to Rachel, and I'll just stop sharing my screen and I'll let Rachel take over the screen.
Thank you. Let's try and make this as seamless as possible. Two secs whilst I minimise this. Tell you what, technology, it's just fabulous, isn't it? How do you minimise the screen, Paul?
Is that to see notes?
Yeah.
I had over 2 screens on mine, so I don't know how you minimise on that one. I think it just does the presentation mode.
Never mind, let's just go on. So, hello everybody, Rachel Chambers. So as Paul's already introduced me, I will crack on. So I'm the COO for Driving the Electric Revolution Centre in the North East. Not sure if anybody's heard of this, it was in a previous life called the Stevenson Challenge, but effectively it's an industrial strategy challenge fund driven by UK government policy on the clean growth specifically. And the mission statement there, as you can see, is to build 5 billion more power electronic motors and drives, or PEMD, which I will refer to for the rest of the presentation, products in the UK by 2025, and it will work across 7 sectors, which I'll talk about in a minute. And this is through collaboration with academia, RTOs, to establish a stronger PEMD supply chain. What that means really, in the premise of this project, of which government have invested 80 million into initially, which we know isn't enough, but I think my job is to work with the government to make sure we get some more money for this. But the development of supply chain is really key to this. And that includes not only those across the 7 sectors, but finding SMEs probably in the main who can work across those 7 sectors, which was why it was quite interesting today when Paul had invited me, and I spoke to him this morning to understand actually the crowd that I'm talking to, the people I'm talking to aren't necessarily within the auto sector. But that's great. That's where we want to find these companies and get them involved in working with us. So I'll just take you through a few of the things around the background, how we're engaging and signposting, and there's an equipment request process, which I'll talk about as well. So our strategy, so the vision and mission is to be the gateway to world-class design, manufacture, test validation capabilities. The aim for us is to not only provide our own supply chain, so the UK, it's almost a bit like the made in Britain analogy, which becomes even more important given Brexit and now the pandemic. But we want to be the go-to place globally. We already know that, for example, in the US and China in particular, there is a lot of work going on around electrification, as you can probably imagine. But we want to have, we want to be that go-to place globally, and we believe we've got the expertise and capability within, not only within the region. I mean, Paul showed you before how many companies are in the region, but actually across the whole of the UK. And the mission is to represent and deliver on the needs of UK PEMD supply chain and supporting that growth, which is about investing in the supply chain, which is typically SMEs, which support the OEMs, tier ones, etc. So we've kind of got 3 pillars. One's around investment and growth, encouraging reshoring, developing the SMEs, inward investment. You've then got industrial engagement, which is around understanding where the gaps sit across the supply chain and helping industry fill those, and providing solutions across 7 sectors. So the benefit of this is having the ability to either build on capability that already exists, and the auto sector is pretty good at electrification already, and leveraging that to support the other sectors that we're working with, and then accelerating scale up and innovation. And then there's the skills development. So as part of the 80 million, there's around 10 million that will be supporting skills development. There are limited, let's just say, limited PEMD capability within, or skills within the UK. And what we do have is amazing, but we need more of them. And like I said before, the leveraging capability is kind of the red line, or the blue line in this instance, that sits across it. So my splattered frog diagram, it's rather attractive, and this is to try and explain how the centres, Driving the Electric Revolution Centres, will work with industry and the other parties. So industry is large because it's an industry-led project, and the premise of this, and you can see there the 7 sectors that we're working with, is to ensure the signposting piece. So the key aspect of what we will do is signposting, and that means that we will have, quite uniquely compared to other countries, is a database that has, it's kind of the one-stop shop for anything to do with PEMD, whether it's manufacturers, suppliers, supply chain, OEMs, SMEs, tier ones. And it means that any one of you guys could come to me and say, Rachel, I've got a challenge in X. I can look at my database, look at the capability within each of those areas, and signpost you in the right way. And it could be multiple companies, it could be one. And that also sits across government. So we're working across the UK with all the different regional, national government partners to leverage their support and their funding. Paul mentioned earlier the APC, so they're a key partner of ours where we can work with them to support the additional funding. Like I said, 80 million is not going to be sufficient. So we are working with the likes of APC and other sector funders such as ATI in the aerospace, etc., who can support that. As well as in the green here, you'll see the technology translation. So you've got catapults, other RTOs, etc., who can provide capability as well. And this is all, it's all very circular here, that we look for market trends, we look to support the new technologies, and that comes equally from industry, but also from the strength we have in the UK around our academic research as well. Bit of a full chart, but I just wanted to try and explain how this is kind of working. So you've got a program board, which is with the challenge director. The challenge director works for UKRI and is leading the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund on behalf of this. We have a board of which the centre leads will be part of that, as well as the challenge directors. And then you'll see the 4 key centres there, and we will be also recruiting for business development people and marketing people in the near future. So watch this space. So the centres, where will they be located? So we've got an overall lead, which is Newcastle University, who will lead what is 30 million to support the centres project. The centres are located in the North East, which was the CESAM building, but we've got a little temporary home at Washington Business Park. You've got the Midlands, which is sort of distributed facilities focused on Nottingham University, but working closely with WMG. In Scotland, they've got a National Manufacturing Institute Scotland facility in Glasgow, and then in Wales, it's what is called the CSA Catapult based in Newport. Right, in terms of the locations, I thought this map will be quite helpful. So we have accessed over 300 million pounds worth of equipment across our 35 partners, and highlighted, you can see where those partners are, and you can see sort of where the clusters sit, which is effectively why the centres were chosen in the location that they were chosen, because it sits within where the partners' academic technical capability sits. And what it does is having that spread across the UK allows us to access and support all of the OEMs and SMEs, etc., and allows us to deploy that expertise much easier. There is a purpose as well in terms of supplying end-to-end PEMD activity. So in Wales, you've got materials and components. In the Midlands, they're focusing on prototype and scale up of motors and drives, but more specifically around power electronics and things like coil winding. In the North East, we will be focused on having machine and drive assembly, power electronics assembly, integration and testing. and in Glasgow it's high power energy and sort of the larger sectors such as marine and the energy sector. So part of our journey to get to this point really of opening the centres, we've engaged with over 130 industrial organisations and continue to do so. The map on the right shows you the sort of the chunks of sectors where we've and who we've been talking to, and clearly automotive is the largest sector, with energy and aero being sort of second to that. What we do recognise is that, you know, we do need to do a lot more work with probably more maritime and rail, but ultimately this is a continued project. So my ask of you really is to come and speak to me. It doesn't matter what sector you sit in, but if you can support one of those 7 sectors, you know, that's the critical piece to invest in the capability. We're doing a number of engagement activity. For example, this is one of them, so thank you to Paul for letting me do this. But we're also working with other membership organisations, and in fact the KTN, the Knowledge Transfer Network, who are part of UKRI, are setting up webinars on a regular basis, sort of fortnightly, which is around, it could be technology events, it could be SME focused events. And clearly when we can eventually meet face to face, we'll be having lots of conferences and exhibitions and such like. So if you haven't already spoken to the KTN, I'd encourage you to do so, because ultimately as well they will be talking about future funding and project opportunities within driving the electric revolution. Clearly I'll be keeping Paul up to date as well. There's also other funding bodies which I'll just mention as well that we'll be working with and partnering with to get additional funding. So I mentioned the APC and ATI, but we've got ACIN, SMMT, BEIS, Department of Industry and Trade as well. As part of the work that we're doing at the moment, we need to fill our centres with lots of lovely equipment which can support the progression and acceleration of our supply chain. I didn't want to provide all the information on how you kind of go about the equipment request, but what I would encourage you to do is, if you think that you have capability within your organisation that can support PEMD, is to get in touch. There's a number of things that are going on at the moment. So we are working with industry to understand where their gaps are and effectively hopefully procuring equipment or putting equipment requests in which fulfill that. So I mentioned earlier around looking at machine assembly and power electronic assembly line, and that's been driven by multiple industry partners saying this is a pretty significant gap for us. So we're wanting to hear from people who can either be the manufacturer of that equipment, from people within the supply chain, or people that want to input into this process, who can provide me with an understanding of where their gaps are as well. And this is part of the whole signposting process as well. So we've got a deadline here of the 15th of May. So we've still got a week or so to a couple of weeks to do this. So please get in touch after this if you've got any interest in informing me or the rest of the team in terms of equipment. So why are we doing this now? I think this question was asked when we were talking about Brexit, and it's still getting asked even through the pandemic. I don't think I've ever been busier, if I'm being honest, and that is mainly to do with making sure we accelerate what the SMEs are doing in particular. We've got some challenges around OEMs, given a lot of them have been furloughed, but ultimately it's the supply chain. So when things do get back on track, we need to make sure not only are we keeping the SMEs in business, but we're allowing them to grow through supporting them with funded projects or equipment availability. So we've got 30 million to spend. of which I think I could make a pretty good job of spending that in the first 12 months. So between effectively March this year and March next year. It's around expanding the capability and capacity for both UK and export markets, and encouraging PEMD players to invest into the UK. So one of the things that myself and my other colleagues will be doing is going to the US, going to Japan, going to those places to encourage them to put their manufacturing facilities within the UK, and likewise accelerating that cross-sector opportunity. So we want to encourage industry players to source more in the UK, and we can only do that by investing and growing our SMEs so they become more capable, they become they have the investment to be able to grow and really transform the UK in the PEMD space. So, and plus we want to be ahead of the curve. We want to be recognised as the first country to have that strong capability and an end-to-end solution. So I've just got some details here. I can send these slides on, but you can see there are four centres, as I've mentioned, and each of them have contact details. And if there's a particular area that you want to have a chat about, whether it's materials and components or high power or what I'm doing in the North East, etc., just give me a call. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that. Just one thing that wasn't covered off in the presentation that I have seen on previous presentations around is the scale of the opportunity. So for people on the call who've not heard anything, one of the graphs that I had seen was the sector for PEMD, the market for PEMD is expected to grow by about 5 billion by 2025 and about 80 billion by 2050. Is that still the case?
It is. We think that it's an interesting one, really. I mean, I've been on plenty of SMMT calls, etc. Recently. We think it might be slightly less than that, but we don't think it's significant. And the reason for that is that the pandemic will change things maybe in the next couple of years. So I think you could almost shift that curve out by a couple of years. But ultimately, the drive around clean growth and electrification will still be there. The government are looking at other funding mechanisms to support companies out of the COVID crisis, and will continue to invest in the electrification. Like I mentioned earlier, the 80 million is not enough, but we're expecting to have more. And even if it's not through driving the electric revolution, it will be through other government funded projects. Okay,
I appreciate that. Thank you. So obviously people have now seen the scale of the opportunities from existing component where OEMs are looking to localize or source from within the UK, the new technology opportunities. But for any company that's looking to start supplying into automotive, they really do need to understand the standards and entry requirement. So I'm glad to say we've got Andrew Wilson, consultant trainer from AQCT, who's going to take us through what those requirements are. So if I stop sharing my screen, Andrew, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Paul. So good morning. My name is Andrew Wilson from Absolute Quality Consultancy and Training Limited. And I've been asked to give a brief overview of a couple of management system standards that are applicable to the sector and how they really support the supply chain. First of all, a bit of an apology. The last time we ran this, it was one of my consultants, Laura Wilson, who delivered this training. She's unavailable today, and I said I would attempt a stand-in role. I am actually the Director of Training, so any specific or technical implementation questions are better forwarded to her. I will do my best at the end to address any, but if there's anything technical, we'll get Laura to deal with them directly. So with that, let's move on. So today I've been asked to look at a couple of important things about the sector. We'll explain why all supply chains require certain standards, certain requirements. We'll look at how those standards actually fit in and strengthen your existing good practice. And we're going to focus largely around two standards of ISO 9001. So just for simplicity, I will refer to it as ISO or ISO. An abbreviation from ISO is International Standards Organization. There are lots and lots of them. We will also look at a specific automotive standard, and for simplicity, I'll refer to that as the IATF standard. As you can see, there's a lot of acronyms involved. And then we're very, very briefly going to talk about how an implementation works. I think it's worth just taking a moment to look at the advantages and disadvantages of supply chains. Both speakers so far have touched on impacts and challenges. Supply chains are made up clearly of independent links. The strength of a supply chain, however, is significantly impacted if those links aren't strong. So being part of a supply chain does provide the opportunity for risk. If a sector fails, if a customer goes somewhere else, or one of the links within a supply chain is weak, the supply chain can actually break down as well. The upside of that, however, is very much that there are huge opportunities within supply chains. Being part of an established supply chain can really allow access to consistency of work, volume of work. We can then look at economies of scale based on that. And there's also other opportunities for collaboration, coordination, and that gives other strengths. So why is it a supply chain has certain requirements? Well, clearly, as I've said, if a supply chain is only as strong as its weakest link, a supply chain would require all of the links within that supply chain to be able to respond appropriately. So they need to be reactive to change, but proactive. They need to be able to manage change in a very controlled way, so it doesn't cause disruption, but importantly need to be adaptable and versatile. So that's a lot of words to basically say what a supply chain needs as suppliers with a toolkit that can meet the requirements not only of their immediate customers, but the whole supply chain. And by certifying against standards such as ISO 9001 and the IATF standard, this really does demonstrate an ability to act as a strong link within a supply chain. And if those links are strong, that significantly reduces risk throughout the whole of the supply chain. In simple terms, the risk of the chain breaking. So implementation of any management system should not and does not require an organization to start from scratch. Businesses tend to be, particularly the businesses interested in working in significant supply chains, tend to be already reasonably, if not very successful. So a management system implementation should really be building on these good foundations. What we see within standards like ISO 9001 and the supplemental bits from IATF are really business best practices. By implementing standards, what we should be seeing is a good structure to be put in place for consistency that helps drive customer satisfaction and a reduction of risk and an ability to act on opportunities as they arise, all of which really should make businesses as individual links and the supply chain sort of better, faster, stronger, leaner. And that should translate into greater customer satisfaction and as a result, improved financial performance. However, yes, we've got to acknowledge there is an investment here, but it should be seen as an investment, not a cost. And this really should translate, as I say, through improved performance. If done correctly, a management system implemented and certified against these sorts of standards really should make the business better and add value. ISO 9001 has been around for quite a few years. It's been reissued over those years. And since its original inception, it's been based on what sounds like very logical, very sensible business principles. Clearly, it's a good idea to get the right product or service to the right place, in front of the right customers, when they want it and at an appropriate price. And you would believe that that should lead to customer satisfaction. Unfortunately, this is not always actually the case. A really good example of that from outside of the automotive sector. One of our clients works heavily, or worked historically very heavily, in the oil and gas sector. And as I'm sure we're all aware, that crashed a couple of years ago. And despite the client having extremely happy customers, they suddenly found themselves with extremely happy customers, but with no money to spend. They just didn't have the resources to buy the products and services. So in the latest iteration of ISO 9001, which was published in 2015, so you often see ISO 9000 and then a number like 2015, that's showing the issue number. There were some additional clauses put in. These clauses have really strengthened management system standards like ISO 9001. On building on the original principles, they've added clauses around understanding the context of the organization, the importance of leadership, and the importance of strong foundational planning. The company that I mentioned previously that was suffering significantly from the contraction of oil and gas really reviewed its business in context. And I'm going to explain each of these clauses very briefly in a moment. And in doing so, they looked at risks and opportunities. They were able to look at diversification. They looked at sectors they'd never even considered before the collapse of oil and gas. This moved them into new sectors, and they're now stronger than ever because they're supplying the bounce back to the oil and gas sector, but also the new sectors that they engaged with during this process. So if we look at each of these clauses very briefly, and I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail on each of these, but the first one, clause 4, is about context, and this is the one that people often struggle to get their heads around. Context is really acknowledgement that the business needs to understand where it fits in. It needs to fit in, it needs to understand where it fits in terms of those pressures and influences, both internal and external. And we've heard repeatedly this morning about the pressures of the businesses are facing through COVID. We were talking about Brexit an awful lot recently. These were both external impacts. And to a large extent, these are often beyond the initial control of the organization. If we really unpack and understand who our interested parties are and where we fit within the supply chain, we can understand the context in which we're operating. And this allows us to make better business decisions. It allows us to respond better to risk and to seize opportunities better. Just briefly for clarity, when we say interested parties, we're actually looking at people and organizations who are interested in our business for whatever reason, in what we do, but also who may be affected by our business activities. And it's really important we understand not only where we sit within the supply chain, but how we have an influence or are influenced by those around us. A key part of clause 4, context, or establishing context of the organization, is about mapping the business processes. And I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this concept, processes with inputs and outputs. We really need to look how the risks and opportunities will be impacted upon and how we can mitigate those by having the right things in the right places. So as I'm sure you're aware, with these sorts of maps, you would typically look at things about your facilities, your people, making sure you've got the right people, the right communication strategies, the right control processes in place. And these, sometimes referred to as turtle diagrams, are core to understanding context. So that's just simply showing you one of the tools that are used. The second of the additional principles that was added in the 2015 version of 9001 is around leadership. And it really does state what was really should have been obvious in the first place, that for any success, leadership has to drive quality and has to drive customer satisfaction from the top of the organization. So what we need is a really good understanding of the principles, and how those help drive the business, which is cascaded through the whole of the organization and therefore through the supply chain. There needs to be a commitment and drive coming from the top, adequate resources and effective communication and support. Otherwise, it's simply impossible to gain the necessary level of buy-in and develop the right organizational culture from the top of the business right the way through. So that was context. I say that's one of the sections that people tend to struggle to visualize at times. The next additional principle was around planning. Sorry, the last one was clearly leadership, not context. The next one's around planning. What we're looking at within this one is an understanding of risk and how to mitigate that risk. One of the key points to recognize in modern business or business management system speech, risk is now a term that wraps up both positives and negatives. So if you think risks and opportunities, they're both encompassed by the term risk now. The first step of an implementation looking at clause 6 is to understand where these risks and opportunities are coming from and how they could have an impact, both positive and negative, on the organization. From there, we need to, in traditional risk assessment approach, look at the existing controls that are in place that already help mitigate risk or help us seize opportunities, and any further controls that might need to be added. From here, we can then add these into our objectives, our company action plans, all of the sorts of things that we are comfortable and used to using to drive our business to make sure we're heading in the right direction. We would prioritize those clearly. We'd be looking to try and tackle the things with the greatest risk or the greatest opportunities first. And we would support this with key performance indicators to make sure we're on track, and management reviews scheduled throughout the year to make sure that we are actually achieving what we should be achieving. Interestingly, when we do achieve objectives, we still need to reassess them to make sure that we have actually tackled the risk or opportunity that was identified in the first place. This is something that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, and ISO 9001 has had built into its heart for many years, along with other management standards, a very sensible concept of plan, do, check and act. This really is a fundamental way of driving the business forward. And we've been doing a lot of work around context and planning recently with clients, looking at how we can de-risk areas of the business and how we can seize opportunities, or to use one of the current buzzwords, pivot to find other opportunities. And clearly that can include engaging with new or engaging further with supply chains. This process of implementation has actually become a bit more straightforward over the last couple of years. This is because since 2011, most of the International Standard Organization standards, ISO standards, have been built to comply with a common structure. And technically, this is referred to as Annex L. It was originally Annex SL, but it's been rebranded or renamed Annex L. And really, the structure now is of 9001-2015 really supports this. This makes integration with other management system standards or future integration of other standards, for example, environmental health and safety standards, into your management system much easier. Additionally, the IATF standard that we've mentioned was really built around this structure as well, and that gives huge amounts of synergy, as I'm about to show you. I mean, if we take a quick snapshot just from one part of that standard, and I'm certainly not going to take you through all the detail of each of these clauses, what I'd like to identify is that the majority of the clauses are actually just cross-referenced to the ISO 9001 standard. So what this really means is the IATF standard focuses on the additional specific automotive requirements. And if you've got or have achieved ISO 9001 already, you're very close. You've got a long way towards achieving the standard, the IATF standard. And this slide really, without reading clause by clause through it, as we've seen, there are 10 clauses in Annex L. The first 3 are absolutely common between 2 standards, with the following 4 to 10, and we've discussed clauses 4, 5 and 6 already. You can see from this, hopefully, the similarities between, or how the IATF standard really is an extension or an addition to the requirements of ISO 9001, and that's really to tailor it to the needs of the automotive supply chain. So what we're really saying in lots and lots of words there is that the IATF standard is really ISO 9001 with the specific automotive bells and whistles added to it. Single slide on implementation. I don't want to take too much time on this. What we would normally work with organisations to do is to understand what's existing within the organisation, and any organisation should do this no matter how they implement, and build on the good practice they always have had in that business. What's working for the business at that time, in other words, should continue to work afterwards. It's really important we get full leadership commitment to drive the cultural changes within the organisation and drive that customer focus. It's really important to develop core structures. There needs to be a standardisation, and manufacturing are very good at this, typically, having everything, a place for everything and everything in its place. It's a bit like a 5S approach, but for your management system. It's understanding the influences. This is all about context. It's understanding the influences on the business, and how the business can handle and identify risk and opportunities. It's about establishing clear processes, putting processes in place that are consistent, that meet the standards of the organisation, but also of the requirements of the supply chain. It's about making sure everyone knows what they're doing. People aren't double doing, there aren't gaps, there's good communication throughout. And everything is tracked through setting strong objectives, well monitored through key performance indicators, regularly reviewed and kept up to date. When we start with clients, we often refer them or liken them to a Rubik's Cube. Most of the companies we deal with they've got the right bits, they're often not in the right places. The correct implementation of a suitable management system is really about resolving that puzzle. It's about putting the pieces in the right place. And by doing so, they can demonstrate to the supply chain and also any other potential customers that they're capable and ready to provide the right resources to feed the supply chain and act as a strong link within that supply chain. As I said, that was a quick run through from the Director of Training rather than one of our implementation consultants. For further information, there are a couple of links there which will be distributed as part of the information that's going out. Laura Wilson, who was hoping to be here today but is unfortunately tied up elsewhere, there are her contact details. My name is Andrew Wilson, but note that my spelling has 2 L's, an unusual spelling of Wilson, and we will endeavour to address any questions that you may have, and hopefully that's been of interest or at least clarified a couple of points for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Really good and very insightful. That I'm guessing you're okay with us sharing your slides following the presentation.
Absolutely, yes, not a problem. You've got a copy of them there.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay,
appreciate that.
I'll stop sharing now.
Let's bring mine up. Just a few more slides and then we're complete. So just moving on in terms of the support that's available through NEAA and supply chain. For those that aren't familiar with the NEAA, we were established in March 2015. We're currently the largest automotive cluster in the UK. There's about 270 companies engaged through the NEAA through various routes. The most common through membership, so over 230 member companies. We then have a number of companies who are on the Supply Chain North East programme, which is funded through ERDF. There are also companies who are members and on the supply chain as well. We have previously supported over 190 SMEs through 2 previous ERDF programmes. and we have significant engagement with the automotive sector. There's about 1,400 companies that we have on our current database. What sets us apart is the fact we are an industry-led cluster group. So we have an exec and advisory board who come together and really look to drive the cluster forward, identify the areas where companies gain from the combined leadership and focus on particular activities. We have a number of industry working groups covering 5 key thematic areas around business resilience, which is extremely important at the moment, skills, innovation, technology, trade and investment, and networking connectivity. And the combined input from those industrialists who engage with us is about $500,000 of in-kind support each year for cluster activities. So it's a very strong industry-led cluster. We also have quite an experienced team. It's certainly a key asset for the North East automotive sector. We've got vast experience, knowledge and contacts. Very diverse set of skills and experience from the various members of the team. A cluster expert, Stuart McGivern, a productivity practitioner, worked for the manufacturing advisory service, and prior to that was also with Nissan in procurement. Eddie has got many years experience within the sector around the skills and training agenda. Obviously worked Sector Skills Council Centre as well. Rowan, information systems practitioner, came in a few years ago into the NEAA. Has been a great addition to the team, and leads our supply chain project. And Laura, very experienced marketing and PR practitioner, who does a fantastic job in promoting the sector and also the various aspects of the NEAA and the membership.
Paul, can I just interject and ask you to put the slides on the screen?
It should be on. Have they not come up?
There we go.
That's it, right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Don't know what happened there. Apologies. So yes, a very experienced team. Just moving on now to the supply chain Northeast. So we're one of the 4 partners involved in the supply chain project. This project will work with over 800 SMEs over a 3-year period. Finishes around 2021. In terms of the support that's available, we're really looking at how we can support the diversity, help companies diversify from their existing sectors, look at how they can de-risk, and look at how they can grow in existing markets also. It's fantastic, this working from home. I've now got somebody knocking on the doors. Bear with us 1 second. Unbelievable. Nobody out in the house to answer, so apologies. So yes, helping companies de-risk, and then also looking at how we can support companies to grow in existing markets. So today is important for companies to be able to identify how they can diversify and move into the automotive sector, or to companies already operating in the sector, how they can grow their existing business within the automotive industry, looking at some of the new opportunities that are coming through. As I said, 800 businesses between 2018 and 2021 across a number of different sectors there, and each of the 4 partners will lead in specific areas. So in terms of the NEAA, we're very much support around automotive and transport, but also in advanced manufacturing also. In terms of the NEAA and the support available, we can offer advice, guidance, sector knowledge, training opportunities through various events, webinars that we will run. We will run a number of key events. So in 2019, the NEAA organised 20 events with over 1,400 delegates. Companies on the supply chain get access to a number of those events, not necessarily all, but certainly the key events we run, Get Into Automotive, was a new conference, really gave great insight into the support available within the sector, the future of automotive, brought in some of the key organisations from across the entire UK looking at the future direction, and then the North East Automotive Expo, which is probably our signature event and is a key route to market for businesses. And we also do a lot in terms of support on route to market. As I mentioned, the team has a very knowledgeable and experienced, and is extremely well connected. We can support companies in terms of one-to-one introductions to businesses as well. Just wanted to touch on the expo. So we currently have it planned for the 24th of September. Obviously, we're watching what's happening in terms of the current pandemic and the implications around social distancing. We do have another provisional date booked with a beacon of light in case we need to move it back, but we're currently still aiming for the 24th of September. But we'll obviously keep everyone abreast of the decisions there. To give you an idea of the size and scale, in 2019 we had over 600 delegates attend, 130 exhibitors. There were more than 100 one-to-one meet the buyer meetings. And then we added a new tech zone. In terms of 2020, we are looking at a similar size in terms of exhibitions, meet the buyers. We'll have technology stands, demonstrator zones. We're introducing trade zone, trade and investment zone. We'll have a supply chain zone again, keynote address, car showcase, and we do have a dinner the night before as well to aid networking. It really is a key event for companies. And I would say, in terms of the supply chain Northeast zone, companies who are on our programme can get a fully funded stand as part of their support package through Supply Chain Northeast. And we've got some fantastic testimonials, which I'll share within the presentation pack when we send it out, but they're not included in the presentation, so I've just hidden the slides due to time constraints. So that really covers off everything. I'd like to thank Rachel and Andrew for supporting that, and obviously everyone for dialing in as well. If people do have any questions, there are abilities to be able to post the questions in the chat facility within there. And if not, if there's anything people want to follow up on, feel free to contact us directly, or when we share the information over for Rachel and Andrew, feel free to follow up with Rachel and Andrew. So thank you everyone, I really appreciate that. I'm going to stop sharing the slide now, but from what I can see, I can't see any questions that have come in through the chat, so I'm presuming there's no questions there.
We've just had people asking for copies of slides, which obviously is fine.
Okay, so I can't see the chat. Is it just you who sees the chat, Laura?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Apologies for the overrun, but as I say, we had planned it for 4 hours, and we tried to cut it back as much as we can, as much as we could. But obviously, there's a lot of information to share and to go through. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
No problem.
If, as I say, if anybody wants any assistance,
I'll speak